Hi, I'm Norm, and I've been with the Roastery Coffee Company a number of years, and today I would like to talk to you about coffee. And we'll start with the history of coffee. There are several legends about the history of coffee, but the legend that's most accepted is about a goat herder named Chaldee. Chaldee was a goat herder who lived in Ethiopia around 850 AD, and one day he was out herding his goats, and the goats started eating the coffee berries off the tree. The goats started prancing around from the caffeine high, and so Chaldee got curious and he chewed on a few of the coffee berries and he started dancing around from the caffeine high. And that was really the beginning of the discovery that there was something in this coffee berry that caused people to have a little euphoria. For the next 250 to 300 years, they hadn't learned to roast the seeds out of the coffee berry. But that changed around 1200 AD when they learned they could take these seeds and roast them. As it started to spread up into Europe, there were some priests that went to Pope Clement VIII and said, "Good Pope, this coffee brew coming out of the Middle East is the devil's brew, and you got to tell people not to drink it." Pope Clement VIII said, "Well, bring some of brewed coffee in here, I want to smell it." And so they brought it in and he smelled it, and to their horror, he drank it. They thought he would turn into the devil or die on the spot, but instead the history books say that Pope Clement VIII grinned from ear to ear and said, "Wow, whatever this stuff is, it's good, and we are going to do a blessing and steal it away from the devil." And so Pope Clement VIII gave a blessing on coffee, and after that people felt free to drink coffee. We like to think today there's a coffee shop on every corner, or two or three, but that's not a new phenomenon. In the early 1700s, in London alone, there were over 2,000 coffee shops, and they were called penny universities. And for a small amount of money, people could go down there and have a cup of coffee. The government didn't like this. They did not like these people drinking coffee. The government didn't mind if people drank alcohol because alcohol is a depressant. But coffee is a stimulant, and it causes you to think, and the government assumed they were getting together talking about overthrowing the government. But what really killed it in England, because England went on to become a tea drinking nation, was that the rich folks got control of the tea fields in the Far East. And they had a vested interest in those tea fields and no interest in coffee. And so they wanted to promote tea and downplay coffee. And they did several things to accomplish that, but one of the main things they did was to tax coffee heavily. Just the opposite happened in the United States. We have a little event called the Boston Tea Party. And at the Boston Tea Party, the British were trying to tax tea heavily. The Patriots not only did not want to drink tea because it was expensive, they didn't want to drink it because it represented England. And so the United States went on to become a coffee drinking nation. Up until 1900 in the United States, coffee is a very good brew. We could almost call it specialty coffee. But from 1900 till 1960, coffee changed. And so by the early 1960s in the United States, coffee is something you get in a can that's not very good. Several things caused coffee to change from 1900 to 1960. And among those things were the discovery of a second species of coffee in 1896 in the Belgian Congo in Africa. Our friend Chaldee discovered Arabica coffee in 850 AD, but all those centuries later they discovered a species called Robusta. And it had many advantages for manufacturers. Got much bigger yield per tree, and it grew at a very low elevation where it was much easier to pick. That changed in 1966 when a gentleman opened a coffee shop on the corner of Walnut and Vine in Berkeley, California, and his name was Mr. Alfred Peet. Mr. Peet is credited with starting the current specialty coffee movement. Mr. Peet wanted to buy better coffees and get it to his customers as fresh as he could. There's some quotes coming out about Mr. Peet, one of which is the very first day he had people out the door and down the block waiting to get into the store. And he said to a friend of his, "My goodness, we could have one of these on every corner." And so he already had a vision of what he had started. When the boys from Starbucks got started, they went down to Mr. Peet. Mr. Peet taught them everything he knew about coffee. Mr. Peet liked to roast coffee dark the European way, and so the boys from Starbucks learned to roast coffee dark the European way. Coffee grows between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn along those two belts along the equator. It is considered a fruit tree, and just like an orange tree, it has to be where it's warm all the time. Coffee on the tree has a red cherry, and inside that cherry are two seeds, and those seeds are extracted, and that's what we roast. Specialty coffee grows very, very high in the mountains and has to be hand-picked. Every species of coffee ever discovered was discovered in Africa. So coffee is a native to Africa and no other country in the world. Coffee has spread through the world, however, because people realized they could grow coffee in the nations along the equator. And so coffee over the centuries has spread to all the places where it is warm along the equator. Roastery buys coffee from 23 different nations in Central, South America, Africa, and the Far East. Cupping is a process where companies like the roastery determine the quality of the coffees that we're going to buy. That started in the late 1800s with two brothers on the West Coast in the San Francisco Bay Area called the Hills Brothers. And the Hills Brothers were going down to the docks, buying green coffee, roasting it, and selling it. But sometimes after they roasted it, they said, hey, this doesn't taste very good. We should go down to the docks, get a sample of the lot of coffee we want to buy, bring it back, roast it, and taste it before we buy it. And they were the first to actually cup coffees. Roastery cups coffees so we can determine the quality of the coffees we're buying. We get samples from farmers and brokers from all over the world and all over the United States, and many, many, many unsolicited samples. People trying to sell us quality coffees. Cupping is basically taking and putting 8.25 grams of coffee in a cup and then adding 200-degree water and letting it set for 5 minutes. Cupping is basically a French press without the press. Once it's set for 5 minutes, then we smell it for aroma, and then we clean the top off to get down to a clean cup, and then we to put it mildly slurp and spit and determine the quality of the coffee.